Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today, we're gonna make a pedal board. I started this build with some scrap hardwood that I had. 3 pieces of oak, 1 piece of maple for the front. All of the edges of these pieces were pretty rough, so I ran them through the table saw to get one clean edge on each piece. Then I used that clean edge along the fence to get an opposite parallel edge. I used the crosscut sled to trim off the ends and then set up a stop block. This let me cut 2 pieces exactly the same length, both for the front and the back and for the 2 ends. And finally I ran all 4 pieces through the table saw to get the correct height for the box. I'm going to use these 2 long offcuts later. I laid the pieces out and put a number so I'd remember which pieces went where. I switched out the blade on my table saw with a dado stack, and this stack was a 1/4 inch thick. A dado stack together with a box joint jig like this makes it really easy to cut finger joints or box joints in pieces. I did several tests with scrap wood before I did the actual pieces, but once I had it dialed in, it was very quick to cut the fingers in all 4 of these pieces to put them together. I did some test fits before I added any glue, just to make sure everything looked good. I also drew a line on the bottom of all these pieces so I remembered their orientation. I put each piece in the vise and then used a slot cutting bit in my router to cut a slot from end to end. I didn't cut into the fingers, just into the main part of the wood. This is the same bit that I used on my arcade machine to add the T-molding around the outside perimeter. This slot is just thick enough to hold this aluminum kick plate that I got at the home center. On the table saw, I cut this piece down to length, but it's so thin that it actually would go underneath my fence. So I clamped on a piece of wood so that I could run it along that surface to cut it to the correct width. I sanded down the inside surfaces of all these pieces of wood because this is the last time I would have access to them. I added glue to all the fingers and added 1 end piece to the 2 long side pieces. You want this kind of joint to be tight enough that you need to use a mallet to knock it together. I slid the aluminum down into the slot in the 3 pieces before adding the opposite end. I had to slide around the aluminum piece to make sure that it fit into all 4 slots. And once I got it in place, then I clamped up the box just to hold everything together in position that I wanted while the glue dried. But after it had dried, I used the disc sander to sand down the ends of the fingers flush to the sides of the box. It leaves a pretty rough surface, so I used a belt sander to smooth it a little bit more and then an orbital sander to get a nice final sand on all of the faces. I set my table saw fence to 2 inches, the height of the actual pedal board, and then used that to cut the box in half. This is kind of nerve-wracking after you've spent the time to make a box, and especially the final cut where the box comes into 2 pieces. I grabbed some offcuts from the very beginning of this project and used a biscuit joiner to join them together to make a single plank. This plank is going to be where the pedals are actually going to sit within the pedal board. I just added glue inside all of the slots that were cut and on the surface, and then hammered in some biscuits. I clamped these up so that they could dry, and then I set the box on the excess piece of aluminum from earlier and traced the outer perimeter. I took this to the bandsaw to cut those lines. I could have done it on the table saw as well, but this was easier. I measured where some of the pre-drilled holes were and then duplicated those positions on the opposite side. I drilled holes in the corner and on those marks. The plank was dry now, so I sanded down the top surface to get it nice and smooth. Then I cut it to length on the table saw using the crosscut sled. I adjusted its position to make sure that the cables would be able to fit through the gap and that the pedals would fit. I marked its placement on the front and the back. I chopped down a scrap of plywood and then held it up to that line. With it held there, I traced the underside and then cut that shape out on the bandsaw. Once I had one wedge, I traced it and then cut a duplicate. These 2 pieces will hold the board at the correct angle and keep it strong since you're stepping on it. I added some glue to the bottom of the board and then clamped on the wedges so that they could dry into place. After it was out of the clamps, I added some glue to the inside of the box and slid the pedal board down in flush with the bottom. I used some clamps to hold these in position while it dried. Once that was dry, I used tung oil finish to cover the entire box, top and bottom. I love the way it brings out the grain in every type of wood, and it's a really nice finish to the touch once it's dry. I used a couple of coats of this, with a light sanding in between. You've heard me talk about them before, and that's because they are awesome. I want to thank Casper for sponsoring this video. If you're not familiar, Casper makes these really fantastic mattresses, and I can say they're fantastic because I've been sleeping on one myself for probably a 1.5 years or so. They're so good that I actually bought them for all my kids as well. It's a combination of memory and latex foam mixed together, and so it's not too squishy, it's not too bouncy, really comfortable, best sleep of my life, honestly. You don't have to go to a mattress store or anything either. You just order it on their website, they ship it to you in a box, and when you pull it out of the box and open the bag, it just inflates into a full-size mattress. It's pretty amazing. You get to sleep on it for 100 nights, and if you don't like it for any reason, they give you your money back and they come take it away. That's pretty awesome. So if you want to check them out, go to casper.com/make, use the code MAKE to get $50 off your first purchase, and be sure to tell them thank you for sponsoring I Like to Make Stuff. Companies like Casper really help me do what I'm doing here, and I'm very grateful for it. So thanks, Casper. I centered the aluminum base on the bottom side of the pedal board, and using a really tiny drill bit, I pre-drilled some holes for each one of these. I added rubber feet to 4 screws and drove them into the corners. I also drove a screw without the foot into the other holes. Then I held the 2 parts of the box together to make sure that all the faces were lined up, and then used some blue tape just to hold it in this position to add the hardware. I added some take-apart hinges to the back of the box, and these allow the top of the box to come off once it's unlatched. The latches were added to each end of the box, and they just need to be installed in their closed position. That way when you turn the knob, it loosens them and then they can open. The last bit of hardware was just a handle from a guitar case. I just centered it on the front of the box and then screwed it in with 2 screws. The hardware was all finished, so I removed all the tape and made sure everything worked. I tested with the pedal, and it works great. This pedal board is not for me. It's actually for Rob Scallon, and you may recognize that name because not too long ago, I made him a shovel guitar. You can check that video out here, and I'll have some links down in the description for videos of him playing that thing. It's amazing what he does with it. You should definitely go watch those if you have not. Well, Rob is getting ready to go out on tour. I'll also have links to his tour down below, but he asked me to make him a small pedal board to take with him. He only uses 4 pedals, so this thing was made specifically to fit his needs. If I made one of these for myself, it would have to be much larger because I have way more pedals than I should. So since this is not for me, I'm not actually gonna mount any of the pedals on here. I'm gonna leave that up to him. I don't wanna mar the surface by drilling into it or anything, but I'm gonna show you 3 different ways that people typically mount these pedals to a board like this. The most common one is probably Velcro. You can get these big industrial size Velcro pieces at any of the home centers. You put 1 piece on the pedal board, 1 piece on the back of the pedal, stick them together. They hold in place really well. Another thing that people use pretty often and works pretty well is zip ties. You can run a long zip tie around the pedal, around the board, and just pull it tight. It's not quite as pretty because you can see the zip tie coming over the top of all the pedals, and sometimes depending on the size and the shape of the pedal you might have to use multiple zip ties, but this is a good temporary option. So the other option is one that I've not actually tried, but somebody recommended recently. The idea is that you take a bicycle chain and you knock out the links. And so each little piece is kind of a figure 8. It has 2 holes and kind of a rounded shape on the outside. So to use those, you unscrew one of these screws, put that chain link in here, and then put the screw back in. That creates a piece coming off with a little hole, and then you drive a screw through that hole into your pedal board. That seems like a really good sturdy way to mount a pedal like this, but I didn't want to do that or even try it because you have to drill into the board. So you kind of have to commit, or just be okay with having a bunch of extra holes if you decide to move your pedals around. I've made several pedal boards in the past, and there are 1,000 different ways to make them, and a lot of that really just depends on the number of pedals that you have and the types of pedals that you have. A lot of pedals have the plugs on the side. Some of them have them on the back, some even have both. Some are different thicknesses, different widths, so it really just depends on what you have as to what you need to make. Me personally, I would need one that was much bigger than this and had probably 2 tiers to hold pedals and route wiring and all that stuff. If you've made a pedal board, I'd love to check it out. You can tag me on Instagram or Twitter or post it to my Facebook wall. I always love to see the stuff that you guys are working on and what you've come up with. And I also love the suggestions that everybody leaves down in the comments below or at my website, ILikeToMakeStuff.com. Also notice down there by the social links that I've got a Twitch link. I stream on Twitch live from my shop once a week, and if you follow me on Twitch, you'll always know when I go live. I've got lots of other project videos for you to check out, and don't forget the links down in the description so you can check out Rob's video about his tour and so you can watch some of his music. He's a really amazing guitarist, and he's a really funny guy. You will definitely enjoy watching him. So that's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next time.